I'm going to go train people and help people live their fullest lives. And so I went and applied, got the job, and quickly learned I wasn't hired to train.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Jam session. Today's guest is Aric Burkhart, who's a senior national sales director with over 16 years of healthcare industry experience and over 12 years of leadership experience. Aric, welcome to the Jam session.
What's up, Rob? Glad to be here, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great having you on the show. And I'm really excited to dive into this discussion because I think your leadership journey, your journey just in general, is pretty cool, especially how you got started. So just to give some context, because I think this will be even more impactful when you start talking about your journey. So how many people are you responsible for?
Now, in my direct organization, I have roughly 200, 220 that I'm responsible for.
Wow. All right. It's a pretty big organization, a lot of
Mhm.
responsibility. All right. So let's go back to the beginning
All
and
right.
you can kind of share how you got started, how you jumped into the healthcare industry as well.
My journey, like a lot of people back in that time, the late 90s, early 2000s, there weren't a lot of doors open. It was not an easy industry to get in. So I was an athlete in college, and I was blessed to have a really good career that exposed me to a lot of great teams and things of that nature. Then I'll speak to that a little bit longer, but I share that because when my career ended, I graduated, I had to figure out something to do. I was on my own and I had bills to pay. And obviously, with outdoors in the pharmaceutical industry, I had to do a little soul searching on what was important to me. And I just loved health and fitness coming out of that athletic world, sports training. Back in the late 90s, too, is when the gym business was really hot. And I had been a member at Gold's Gym for years and was like, okay, well, I think I'm going to follow my passion. I'm going to go train people and help people live their fullest lives. And so I went and applied, got the job, and quickly learned I wasn't hired to train. I was there to sell memberships. And I had to do it quick, too, because started out back in those days, $600 a month plus commission. So basically, living on my own, 600 wasn't going too far. So I had to learn how to sell pretty quickly and didn't know that I would even really enjoy something like that. But I caught on. Some of the best sales training I ever had was in the health and fitness industry. Through a lot of different systems and so forth, needs-based selling, really understanding what the buyers were looking for and correlating your product to meet that. It was really, really cool. And during that time, I learned I loved sales and I loved helping people. And it was a great career. I spent about 7 years in health club management and just absolutely loved it. I had the opportunity to meet my wife, start my family, and that kind of got me on the second chapter. As I learned about sales and that passion there, I'd had aspirations to get into pharma and went for several interviews, put my application out annually, it felt like, at various times, and just never got a lot of response. But then, like I said, I met my wife and started a family, and it got a little bit more serious in terms of, okay, it was time to pursue another avenue. And I was blessed, man. Just one day out of the blue, a buddy of mine from the gym came up to me. He's like, I've known you for a while. I feel like you could be doing so much more. You look like you need a change. I know you just got married. I'm in pharmaceuticals. Have you ever considered that? And I was like, have I? It's every year for the last 5, I've been trying to position my way in and just can't get a nibble. And he said, well, listen, I don't have any available spots now, but as soon as I do, I'll let you know. And that was on a Monday. I'll never forget because it was around my birthday. And on Wednesday, he calls me and he's like, hey, remember that conversation? I need you to be at an interview up in Atlanta tomorrow morning around 9 o'clock. I'm like, okay, what do I need to do? It's like, get your resume and your best suit on. I'm like, well, I don't have a suit. He's like, well, that's a problem. You need to go find one. So, spent the afternoon suit shopping, found something that would work and showed up at 9 o'clock the next morning. And by Friday, I was a pharmaceutical sales rep, man. And I was
Wow.
just so pumped. I mean, it was like a dream job for me. And I had security for my family.
Yeah.
So it's been a pretty much a blessing.
I think it's such a cool story. That's why I had you provide that context of, what you're responsible for now. And it's like that humbling beginnings, right? Where you started from. I think the important thing here to highlight is it took you 5 years to get in, but it sounds like you never really quit on the path that way. You were pretty determined.
Like I said, I'm always kind of a person that does some soul searching when you're making decisions about life. And I think that soul search gets broader when you have more lives that you're accountable for, whether it be personal or professional. I was taught growing up, if you do what you love, you'll never have a day of work in your life kind of things. I'm one that tries to marry my passion and personality with my professional aspirations. So, healthcare seemed like that logical fit. I learned quickly sales aligned to my competitive background, right? The harder I went at it, the more I worked, the better I was, the more I could earn. And I love that kind of independent autonomy. And then to marry that with the fact that I'm doing it and people are having life-changing experience because of it, to me, it's very gratifying and fulfilling, and it's very soothing in that way.
I think it's important because people like you and there are others out there that appreciate the journey and don't take things for granted. And when talking to you, I know your goal was to then become a manager. And even there, you were hit with some obstacles that you had to overcome, but you still were able to persevere.
I didn't always know I wanted to be a leader. I'd always been a leader in different forms and facets throughout my athletic career. And I led teams within health clubs, but small teams of 4 or 5 people, but responsible for broader staffs and things like that. But sales, commercial leadership, that's a whole different game. And I saw quickly, right when I got in, how leaders were operating, the ability to coach and affect people to really go beyond what they thought was possible and achieve, some pretty extraordinary things. It just overtook me in a way. And I learned pretty quickly, like, that's what I want to do. And when I got in, I thought I was making good headway, right? What's the first thing you need to do to get to the next level? Well, you need to prove you can do the one that you're at, that you got a capacity and agility to do a little bit more, and that you're hungry enough to go get it. So I immediately went into that mode. All right, got to show I can sell. If I want to lead salespeople, I need to show I can do it first. I had a couple of good years, and when I first came in to the industry, got on some leadership development tracks. Like all of us, that was when things started to shift in pharma. And I had to make some changes, and I shifted organizations from where I initially started, like a lot of people do. And when I got into the organization I'm in now, I knew I needed to reprove myself at the very ground level, right? So I did. I had a really good year, went for a couple leadership jobs, and was told I'll never be a leader in this organization as is today. And that really put me on pause. Very grateful for the feedback, because I don't know if I would have been here, but I've always been the kind of person that tries to get beyond the cover of the book and cast my judgments and opinions based on the substance behind it. What I mean by that is I didn't put enough emphasis on the image I was projecting. I thought my work would speak for itself. And while I think that's critical for anyone, especially leaders, I learned that image is also important because I'm an N of one, so I'm appeasing myself. But as a leader, you're responsible for inspiring and rallying the masses, right? And my individualism doesn't necessarily reflect that of all. And I needed to neutralize that a little bit more. So I needed to make some changes.
So let's talk about this a little bit.
Yeah.
I think this is an important point. I think a pivotal moment in your career. And I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned here as well. And I remember when you and I first met, I was facilitating one of the Emerging Leaders program in your organization. And I was in the front of the room, and then I think I was done doing whatever I was doing. I came back to the room, sat down, and I met you. And I forget how it came up, but there was some group discussion with participants, and you jumped in and you shared a little bit of the story, how you got feedback that it might have stung a little bit in the beginning, but it was feedback you needed. And it was really important for the participants in the room to hear that. Because here you are, where you are positioned down in your organization. And again, demonstrating that humility of sharing your story about how you got some feedback. It did sting a little bit, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, anytime you've done good, hard work and then you're told it's not going to happen for you, I think, yeah, of course it stings.
Yeah.
But it's like anything. I mean, that's just life. And I go back to my athletic career, and I was blessed to play on some great teams at high levels. And you learn a lot through those adversities and building those teams and achieving. And not every at bat, you're going to hit home runs. There's going to be a lot of strikeouts and a lot of errors made. And it's about resiliency. Setbacks are always going to occur. It's how you take a minute to learn, overcome, and move forward. And that's exactly what I did. I appreciated that feedback. I contested it, right? And I did so in a way by saying, let me show you. If you want me to do something, the best thing you can do is tell me I can't do it, especially if it's something I really want to do, like be a leader. And I went out and sought feedback from others. Hey, this is what was told to me. I need to understand a little bit more why. And went to my peers and went to other leaders and got that feedback in terms of, hey, when you show up, be cognizant of how you're presenting yourself. Be cognizant of the words and the things that you're using and the constant gear. You're super energetic, tons of passion, high levels of drive. That's going to fall on a lot of people the right way, but it's not on everyone. And you got to figure out how to balance that in order to appease to more people. Otherwise, we could put you in a leadership situation, but you're never going to get the followership that you're looking for to establish that dynasty you keep telling us you want to build. So it was probably, like you said, it was probably the most valuable piece of feedback that I could have ever gotten to help me get to where I am today, because what it's done is it's constantly made me check myself on that. I have a great leader today, as I've kind of elevated in more to executive roles, who has really taught me, every quarter you really need to do like an inventory of a few things, how you're investing your time, right? The impact and effect that you're having, strategies and some of the more typical things. But that conversation always puts me in check with, am I doing the right things I need to do to set the right tone with my people?
I think that's a great approach, taking an inventory, right? Because we evolve, where we come across new tasks, new skills, and none of us are perfect. I always talk about how, leading is a lifelong journey of learning, constantly, right? And I think it's important to highlight, again, a couple things. First is, those emerging leaders, they walked away understanding that while initially, when you get some feedback, it might sting, but over time, as long as you approach it the right way, you see the value of it. And what I also picked up on, the second thing is, you said that you went through a few interviews and you were told you were never going to be a manager. But eventually one person took the time and had the courage to actually tell you why.
Yeah, my manager, after I think the second round of no, I was like, look, I was frustrated, and I guess I was considered a value to the organization, and I had some good potential. And so he did what a good leader would do. He helped answer some of my frustration. He went and sought the reasons why and collected that feedback. And then I know it wasn't easy for him to come back and tell me that's what was holding me back, but he did. My ability to transcend started with him. I give him a ton of credit. Courage to come tell a top performer my ability to transcend. It started with him. And having that courage to come tell a top performer do the things that they're not great on. And I think that's an important lesson. But it starts on obviously what my core tenet in leadership is built on trust. And I think that's an important lesson. But it starts on obviously what my core tenet in leadership. I also believe you can't be a successful and effective leader of anyone if you don't have established trust. I also believe you can't be successful without vulnerability and humility too, right? Those things go hand in hand. And I don't know if it's my upbringing, but I was just never made to believe everything I did all the time was the best, that there was always opportunities to learn, grow, and improve. And it's like you say, the inventory piece in terms of having to stop and assess, is what you're doing right? Have you determined the right place to allocate resource and time? Are your people focused in the right areas and messages? I mean, it's so dynamic. So there's just been this massive shift in not only what's needed to be successful at any level, but then leadership has to kind of comprehend all of this and figure out a completely different way to evaluate, because we've also morphed into this high era of individualization. It's always been there. We were always taught, right? Sit, lead, tailor your approach, and this sort of thing. But it's gotten to just a different degree. Throw the pandemic on there, you got a whole nother level of complexities that add variability. So it's a tough gig, but it all is deeply rooted back to what we talked about, that foundation: trust, vulnerability, humility, being empathetic, and trying to put yourself in other people's shoes. If you establish those things up front, regardless of what you go through as a team or the feedback you give to people, it should align from being from the right places that are going to inspire them to get through whatever adversities there are, overcome any opportunities there are, and drive progression. Because that's the other side. There's no company or leader I know today that doesn't have a progressive forecast, that doesn't allow complacency. So it's, as tough as it is, the environment's so fast paced, we got to be better every week than we were the one before. And it's not monumental change, it's incremental change. Yeah. 2 degrees takes water from stationary to boiling. And how do we add a degree every week, right?
Exactly. And there was something you said that I think was important, just going back to the trust, right? And when you're giving feedback, where is it coming from, right? The intent behind it. And I know there's a lot of leaders out there who shy away sometimes from giving feedback. Like even in that scenario, high performer, if I share this, the why behind it, are they going to become demotivated? Are they going to leave? And yet I view that as, by not sharing that, it's more of a selfish approach. At the end of the day, you're thinking more about yourself and trying to retain your top performer versus sharing the feedback that could enhance and change the trajectory of their path. And I get it, right? And a lot of managers do struggle sometimes with demotivating or even thinking they may lose trust.
Yeah. Well, that's the whole assumption theory. We know what they about assumptions. And I think that's important. And I see it all the time. Look, I made the same pitfalls early on in my career. And what I learned really quickly was that performance in our industry is highly variable. You can see massive shifts in rankings and things like that quarter over quarter, because the markets are so dynamic. And like I say, just how to operate and be effective has shifted, and it shifts regularly. Things just change. I learned personally in my career, you've got to put performance and where someone is in the moment in their own bucket. And the question I started learning to ask myself was, can I bet they're going to be better than they are today in 3 to 6 months, based on what I'm seeing in those other critical areas of the role: execution, how people are showing up in front of the customer, allocating their time, managing their resource, all those other compounds and variables. Because that's where I see us getting challenged. And we make the assumption top performer is going to be demoralized if we go in and say, look, you're doing great today, but there's opportunities that, number one, give me concern on sustainability, and number two, that could help you throttle to the next level of where you're trying to go. But I think that oftentimes we go, oh, they're high flying, we don't want to knock it down. But what I found 8 times out of 10, at some point during the year, it's going to come back and out some way. And typically it's the worst time, right? Because FCRs and field coaching reports, those are snapshots in time. Where people really start to get hurt are on like mid-year and annual ratings. And that's typically where it shows. It's a harder conversation for a leader at that moment to go, we were aligned, but you had this big drop. Now you're below expectations at mid-year. I mean, that's just puts them in a very uncompromising position. And what I find it comes back to is it's not trust. Usually the trust piece is there. To me, it comes back more to vision and shared expectations. And that's why I think that's so critical up front when you're establishing that team, that you're taking the time to align on those things. Most of the teams I have, we want to be the best in the country, right? Everyone wants to be the best, top team. We're not hiring people that don't share that winner mentality. But then you start peeling it down. Okay, well, what does that look like as a team and a collective unit? What do we need to do to define that? And I like to ask the question in terms of when our senior leaders and executives are talking about this team behind closed doors, what do you want them to say? And it's always X. How do we show up and do that? And you define that with the group. And if it's X number of calls that we're going to hold ourselves accountable for, X number of reach, X number of frequency. And I know those terms probably get played out in pharma, but at the end of the day, that's the goal of the job. Are you getting to the right customers enough times with the right message? That's going to make a difference. I think it's highly applicable, but once you get that shared commitment, then you just lead to it. I don't say manage, I say lead to it. And if people aren't there, that's fine. They all agreed on that. They could be here in performance, but if they're here in execution, I would bet that's going to flip-flop at some point pretty quickly. And then you're going to be in a compromising place. But if you're managing that and you're giving them this feedback and they're making incremental progress, well, this isn't going to happen. This is going to happen. The elevation, not the decline.
Let's kind of talk a little bit here about what you're focusing on now, right, with management team and what you're trying to focus on with them and your teams.
A couple of places I've been really focused on with my leaders are, number one, like we were talking about earlier, in terms of delineating, putting performance in its box and really having a shared alignment on vision and expectation. So I think that's something that we've been really focused on how do we want to be defined and what's it going to take to get there and what commitments can we make each week to hold ourselves accountable to those things. But then those are only as good as the coaching and pull through that you're getting from your leadership team. And I read a lot of FCRs. I've written a lot and I've read a lot. And
FCRs, just for those out there that may not know, these are field coaching reports where managers go out and when they're observing their sales reps and they're providing them with feedback on how they performed.
And I've been doing a lot of FCR reading, especially during this time, because I know the leaders have been more challenged than ever before to hold people more accountable in different areas. But from reading those FCRs, I saw a couple of things that I've really been drilled down on my leaders. Number one, the sales job's a big job, and there's a lot that goes into it. So in order to be the most effective coaches, we really have to go in with a macro lens and look at things broad spectrum, not transactional and just what's happening in front of customers, but more so some of these other drivers. It's hardcore. There's a lot that goes in. So we've got to really take a more macro look at all these different components that can lead to increased engagement. Most leaders do an excellent job at identifying what is going on. They are locked into what's happening. Someone is not executing the call plan. Someone is not closing in front of their customer. And I think that's the first question when you're coaching and diagnosing that you always have to answer. What is the current situation? Where I saw our coaching fall a little bit short was really getting into that second level of questioning on the why. We initiated this program, Chase the Why. So anytime you identify a what's your problem solver, solving whys, you become leaders and inspires, and you can really get people to do some amazing things. And it also shows a different level of trust, authenticity, genuineness, I believe, when you really take that time to understand that true barrier.
I love the whole approach, chase the why. It does kind of put you in a little bit of a different mindset, doesn't it? It's like it forces managers to go a little bit deeper.
That's what we sign on to do. Look, my job as a leader, how I see it, is I am here to inspire people to go beyond what they think and believe is possible, to achieve some impossible things for some remarkable patients. That's what I feel when I sign the contract. That's what I'm doing. Regardless of what's going on, I have to adapt to the situation, continuously challenge myself out of comfort zones to adapt my approach to this and understand that there's no static or systemic approach to leadership.
Well, your journey in itself basically just speaks to the definition of adaptability and evolution. And right, just to kind of sum up, your journey is a fantastic journey, but it was one of also having the discipline, the perseverance, the willingness to adapt, but also getting the right guidance along the way as well, which you can clearly, as you talk and hear, even how you're approaching your people today, is still with that same approach of helping them progress, building that trust with them, coaching your managers on how they can lead their people better.
Those are the things that make me happy. Building high performing teams, developing leaders, and I'm not going to stop until I reach the top of that.
I think it's a great way to summarize everything we just discussed. I know there's a lot of folks out there listening. They're walking away with a lot of great tips, a lot of inspiration as well. I appreciate you coming on. Like I said, I was looking forward to this discussion and appreciate you coming on and sharing your journey.
I appreciate the opportunity, man. Like I said, I love talking about leadership. It's just so fascinating and such a critical role. Hopefully, there were a few nuggets shared today that can help someone on their journey. And you know where to find me. So if I can ever be a fit for you or any of your listeners, I'm always happy to lend a hand.
Appreciate it, Aric. Thanks again.